The grand alien court was filled with light. Glowing crystals floated above the marble floor, shining in every color of the spectrum. Tall pillars carved with alien symbols stretched to the ceiling, where golden banners hung heavy in the air. The sound of alien nobles whispering echoed through the chamber, voices layered with both wonder and tension. In the center of the hall stood the alien princess, a figure of beauty and power. Her silver gown shimmered as if woven from starlight, and her violet eyes scanned the crowd. She was young, yet every movement carried the grace of her royal blood. To her people, she was not only a leader, but also a symbol of hope. At the edge of the hall stood the human warrior, silent and watchful. He was not born of this world, yet fate had carried him here. He wore no shining armor, only a simple soldier's uniform marked by scars of old battles. But his presence was strong, steady, like a wall between danger and the one he guarded. The alien nobles looked at him with curiosity and sometimes with disdain. To them, he was an outsider, a human in a court that had never welcomed his kind. But the princess had chosen him as her guard for this ceremony, and her word was law. So he stood, motionless, eyes sharp, scanning the hall like a hawk watching prey. The air grew heavy as the ceremony began. An elder alien lifted his staff, calling the court to silence. Ancient words were spoken, vows repeated, and the princess stepped forward to give her blessing. The room was filled with reverence, yet underneath the calm, danger waited, unseen. In the shadows near the far pillar, a figure moved. No one else noticed, but the human did. His instincts screamed of danger. The figure was cloaked in black, face hidden, hands clutching a curved blade that glowed with poison light. The assassin stepped forward, silent as a shadow, eyes fixed on the princess's back. The human's heartbeat quickened, but he did not hesitate. He pushed through the crowd, his boots striking hard against the marble. The alien nobles gasped, angry at his sudden movement. But in the next instant, the blade flashed, cutting through the air toward the princess's heart. Without a thought for himself, the human warrior leapt forward. His body moved faster than his mind. He threw himself between the princess and the blade. The weapon struck his chest, slicing through fabric and flesh. Pain exploded through him, but he did not cry out. The hall froze, silence crashing down like thunder. The princess turned, her eyes wide in horror as the human fell to his knees. Blood darkened his uniform, dripping onto the white floor. Still, he held his ground, pushing the assassin back with one last burst of strength. Guards rushed in, but the assassin was quick. With a spin and a jump, the shadowed figure vanished into the high windows, disappearing into the night. The nobles shouted in panic, some calling for order, others demanding answers. But the princess knelt beside the human, her hand trembling as she pressed against his wound. "You saved me," she whispered, her voice breaking. Her people had traditions older than the stars, traditions that could not be broken. And in that moment, she knew the law. He had given his blood to shield her life. The ancient life debt had been awakened. Her voice rose, clear and strong despite the chaos around her. "By the law of my people, his life is mine, and my life is his," she declared. The court fell silent again, every alien noble frozen in shock. Some gasped, others muttered in anger. For a human to be bound by such a sacred tradition was unthinkable. The warrior tried to speak, his lips pale, his breath heavy. "I only did what was right," he said weakly. But the princess shook her head, her eyes blazing with a fire he had never seen. "No, warrior, you did more than what was right," she whispered. "You gave me back my life, and now my life belongs to you." The guards surrounded them, but their faces showed confusion. To interfere would mean breaking their own sacred law. The assassin's blade had not only drawn blood, it had bound two souls together. A bond of life and death, a bond of fate. And the princess knew the path ahead would change forever. As the human slipped into darkness, his vision fading, he heard her voice once more, soft but unshakable. "I will not let you die, human warrior, not while my breath still lives." And in the eyes of every alien noble, fear and awe grew, for they knew this was only the beginning. The human warrior did not wake in silence. He woke to the sound of voices, sharp and echoing like thunder in the alien court. His chest burned, every breath heavy, yet he forced his eyes open. Above him, alien lights glowed brighter than the stars, and a circle of faces peered down at him. But it was not their eyes he searched for, it was hers. The alien princess sat close, her silver gown stained with his blood. Her hands still pressed against his wound, as if her touch alone could keep him alive. Her violet eyes glowed faintly in the dim light, and in them he saw not fear, but unshakable resolve. When she spoke, her voice cut through the noise, commanding the entire hall. "His life is mine, and my life is his," she repeated. Every noble froze, every whisper silenced. The words were not poetry, they were law. The life debt tradition was not a story told to children. It was a binding oath carried through generations of her people. The human struggled to rise, but the princess stopped him. "Do not move, warrior," she said softly, her voice trembling only when she looked at his wound. "You gave your blood for me, and now by the ancient law of my people, I give all that I am to you." The court erupted once again, voices overlapping, full of disbelief. "He is human," one noble shouted, his voice full of anger. "He is an outsider," another hissed. "How can such a sacred bond be tied to him?" But the princess lifted her hand, silencing them with a single motion. "The law does not ask his bloodline, nor his race, nor his origin," she said firmly. "The law demands only truth, and truth is that he gave his life to protect mine." The human clenched his jaw, his breath ragged. He wanted to argue, to say he had acted out of instinct, not to bind her life. But deep inside, he saw something in her eyes that kept him silent. It was not pity, not obligation, but something older, something unbreakable. The elder stepped forward, his long staff striking the marble floor with a heavy sound. "Princess," he said gravely, "do you understand the weight of what you speak? If you bind yourself to him, the human is no longer a mere guard. He becomes your equal, your fate, your shield, and your chain." The princess did not blink. "I understand," she replied, "and I accept it." The court gasped, but none dared to oppose her openly. For though she was young, the law was stronger than all of them. The human's head swam, his body weak, but his heart beat harder with every word. He could not decide if this was honor or curse, but he knew one thing: nothing would ever be the same again. Later, as the hall emptied and the whispers faded into the corridors, the human lay on a bed of alien silk, the princess sitting by his side. "Why?" he finally asked, his voice rough. "Why would you tie yourself to me?" The princess lowered her gaze, her silver hair falling across her face. "Because the blade was meant for me," she whispered, "and because I know who sent it." The human frowned, her words cutting deeper than his wound. "You know?" he asked, struggling to sit. She nodded slowly. "Yes, warrior, the assassin is only a shadow, but the hand that moved it belongs to someone in this court." The air turned colder at her words. The human realized this was not only about saving her life. It was about politics, power, and enemies who would not stop until she was gone. Now, because of the life debt, those enemies would come for him as well. The bond had not only saved her, it had painted a target on his back. Still, the princess looked at him with quiet fire. "You may see yourself as only human," she said gently. "But today you became part of something larger than both of us." The human lowered his gaze, his thoughts heavy. He had saved her life, but in doing so, he had stepped into a war he did not understand. Outside the chamber, whispers of rebellion grew louder. Nobles spoke of dishonor, of broken tradition, of a princess who had tied herself to a human. But none could break the bond now. The law was clear. The fate of a human warrior and an alien princess was sealed. And in the silence of the night, as shadows gathered beyond the palace walls, the assassin's vow echoed in the darkness. The blade had failed once, but it would strike again. And when it did, both human and princess would face it together, bound by blood, by law, and by destiny. The human warrior woke not to silence, but to the sound of rain. Soft drops tapped against the tall windows of the alien palace, glowing faintly under the twin moons. His chest still burned from the assassin's blade, but the wound had been closed with alien healing light. Every breath reminded him that he was alive, though he could not understand why fate had spared him. Beside him, the alien princess had not moved all night. Her silver gown was wrinkled, her violet eyes dim with exhaustion, yet she did not leave his side. When she saw him stir, she straightened, her hand tightening around his. "You live," she whispered, almost in disbelief. He gave a weak nod, but his voice carried confusion. "Why would you do this, princess? Why bind your life to mine?" Her answer came with no hesitation. "Because law is law," she said, but her gaze softened. "And because my heart would not allow me to let you go." The human turned away, unease growing in his chest. He had been a soldier all his life, but never before had someone claimed him with words older than empires. Before he could respond, the elder returned, his staff striking the floor with heavy echoes. "The bond is sealed," the elder declared, his voice loud enough for the walls to hear. "From this day forth, your fates are tied, and no power in this court can break what has been spoken." The human felt the weight of those words press down on him, heavier than any chain. The princess did not flinch. Instead, she stood tall, facing the elder with unwavering resolve. Yet outside the chamber, whispers spread like fire. Some nobles called it a blessing, others a curse. A human bound to their princess was an insult to tradition, or perhaps a dangerous advantage. Enemies who once plotted in silence now sharpened their blades openly. And the warrior realized that saving her had not ended the danger. It had only begun a storm. That night, as he tried to rest, the princess spoke again, her voice soft but unyielding. "You see this bond as a burden," she said, "but you do not understand what it means to my people." He frowned. "Then tell me." She leaned closer, her eyes glowing faintly in the moonlight. "It means that you are no longer just my guard. You are my equal, my shield, and my chosen." The human's chest tightened at her words. He had fought wars, carried scars, faced death, but never had he been called chosen. The bond was more than law. It was a vow that would outlast kingdoms. Still, doubt not at him. "What if I fail you?" he asked quietly. The princess shook her head. "Then we fall together, for that is the way of the life debt." Their conversation was cut short by a sudden crash. The doors of the chamber shook, and alien guards rushed in. A messenger fell to his knees before the princess, his voice trembling. "My lady, another attempt has been made. A caravan loyal to you has been destroyed beyond the city walls." The human's hand went instinctively to the hilt of his weapon, though his wound still ached. The princess's face hardened, sorrow flickering behind her resolve. "They will not stop," she said, her voice low. "Not until I am gone, and now not until you are gone as well." The human rose slowly, fighting the pain. "Then let them come," he said firmly, his voice steady despite his weakness. "If my life is tied to yours, princess, then they will have to cut through me every time they reach for you." For the first time, the princess smiled faintly, a smile not of royalty, but of someone who saw hope. The human realized then that his sacrifice had not only saved her life, it had sealed his place in a war that was larger than both of them. And as the rain outside turned heavier, thunder rolling across the alien skies, he knew the bond was not just sealed by law. It was sealed by destiny. But in the shadows of the palace corridors, unseen eyes watched. The assassin who had failed once now sharpened another blade. This time, he did not aim only for the princess. This time, the human warrior himself was marked, and the bond that tied them would soon be tested by fire and blood. The palace did not sleep. Even when the twin moons climbed high, the corridors echoed with footsteps, hushed voices, and secrets carried in the dark. The human warrior felt it long before he saw it. The tension in the air, the way guards avoided his eyes, the way nobles whispered as he passed. It was not only about the bond with the princess. It was something larger, something moving beneath the surface like fire under ice. One evening, as storm clouds gathered above the capital, the warrior walked through the outer courtyard. He saw smoke in the distance, faint but rising from villages loyal to the princess. At first he thought it was nothing more than a raid, but when a messenger stumbled through the gates, bleeding and terrified, he knew the truth. "They are burning the villages," the messenger gasped. "The rebels strike in her name, but they seek to erase her from the throne." The human's hand went to his weapon, but before he could speak, the princess stepped forward, her violet eyes sharp with fury. "They dare use my name," she whispered, "yet plot to end me." She looked at the warrior, and in that moment, he saw both fear and fire in her gaze. "This is not only assassination, this is rebellion," she said, her voice low but unshakable. The court reacted in chaos. Some nobles demanded she step aside for safety. Others whispered that binding herself to a human had sparked the unrest. The warrior stood silent, listening, but inside his chest, anger burned. He had faced armies before, but never had he stood in the center of such poisoned words. Every glance told him the same thing. Many in this court wanted her gone, and perhaps him with her. That night, the warrior and the princess walked alone through the hidden gardens of the palace. The air smelled of rain and iron. The fountains ran red with the reflection of torches. "Do you trust them?" the human asked, his voice steady. The princess shook her head slowly. "Trust is a luxury I can no longer afford," she said. "The rebellion is not only outside these walls. It lives here, in the very court sworn to protect me." The warrior studied her face, the faint glow of her eyes under the moonlight. "You think the assassin was one of them?" he asked. "I do not think," she replied. "I know." The words carried weight, sharper than any blade. It was not an enemy from beyond the stars that threatened them, but her own people, hungry for power. Before he could respond, the ground trembled beneath their feet. An explosion ripped through the far side of the palace, fire leaping into the night sky. Guards shouted, alarms rang, and smoke curled above the towers. The rebellion had come not with whispers this time, but with fire. The warrior grabbed her hand and pulled her behind the stone walls of the garden. Arrows whistled through the air, one striking the fountain where she had stood a moment before. The princess gasped, but the human's grip was iron, his voice hard. "They want you alive for politics, or dead for power, but they will not have you either way." Together they ran through the darkened halls, flames licking at the walls as the rebels pressed closer. Every turn brought more danger, shadows leaping from behind pillars, blades flashing in the light. The human fought with steel and fury, each strike echoing against the marble floors. The princess fought beside him, her alien power glowing faintly as she pushed enemies back with bursts of shimmering energy. The palace that had once been filled with ceremony and light was now a battlefield. Every noble's loyalty was questioned. Every guard's hand trembled on their sword. The rebellion was no longer a whisper. It was a storm tearing through the heart of the empire. At last they found safety in a hidden chamber deep beneath the throne room. The human pressed against the heavy doors, keeping them closed as the princess caught her breath. For the first time since the blade had struck him, he saw her falter, her shoulders trembling. "They will not stop," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Not until the throne is theirs, or I am gone." The human looked at her, sweat and blood running down his face, his voice steady even in the chaos. "Then let them come," he said firmly. "You are not alone anymore, princess, not while I live." Her eyes met his, and though the palace shook with rebellion above, for one moment she believed him. The bond between them was no longer just law, it was survival, and survival was the only truth left in a world drowning in betrayal. But in the shadows beyond the chamber, footsteps gathered. The rebels had not lost their prey, they were hunting still, and the night was far from over. The palace no longer felt like a fortress. It felt like a cage, full of eyes, whispers, and shadows that could not be trusted. The human warrior walked through the ruined halls with his hand on his weapon. Every guard's glance seemed sharp. Every noble's silence seemed dangerous. He had fought on battlefields before, but never had he been trapped in a war of secrets. The princess stood beside him, her face pale in the torchlight. The rebellion had struck and vanished, leaving fire, blood, and doubt behind. Some nobles swore loyalty, others vanished into the night. And in every corner, the question grew louder. Who had betrayed her first? That night, when the noise of the palace faded, the human found her alone in the council chamber. Her hands trembled as she traced the carvings on the long stone table. "You do not trust them," he said quietly. She turned to him, her violet eyes full of storm. "How can I? They are my people, my blood, yet they send blades and fire against me." Her voice broke, softer now. "If I cannot trust them, who can I trust?" The words hung heavy between them. The human's chest tightened, for he knew the answer she did not speak. She wanted to trust him, but the bond between them was not born of choice, it was forced by law. And in the silence, he wondered, did she trust him, or only the ancient tradition that bound them? I did not ask for this bond, he said at last, his voice firm. I acted because it was right, not because I wanted chains. The princess flinched at his words, her hands curling into fists. You think this is chains? She whispered, her tone sharp. This bond saved your life as much as it saved mine. Human, do not forget that. The room grew colder, the distance between them wider. The warrior looked at her, anger burning in his chest. Then tell me, princess, he said, his voice low, if the law had not demanded it, would you still stand beside me? Her eyes widened, as if the question had cut deeper than any blade. For a long moment she said nothing, silence pressing down like iron. Then she spoke, her voice trembling. Yes, she said finally, because when you leapt before the blade, no law commanded you, no crown ordered you. It was your heart that chose, and my heart cannot forget it. The warrior's breath caught, his anger fading, but his doubt did not leave completely. Trust was a fragile thing, and in a world filled with rebellion, it was as rare as peace. Before either could speak again, the heavy doors of the chamber burst open. A young guard stumbled inside, his face pale, his armor cracked. My lady, he gasped. The rebels, they are no longer at the gates. They are inside, in the barracks, in the armories. The human's eyes narrowed, his voice sharp. Then it is not rebellion, it is infiltration. The princess stood, her fire returning. They will test us from within, break us with lies and betrayal before they strike again, she said. The human's hand tightened on his sword. Then we test them too, he replied. We find who wears loyalty as a mask, and who carries truth in their heart. The bond between them still trembled like glass, but for the moment, their purpose was the same. They walked together into the storm of rebellion, each step heavier with doubt and destiny. The princess's heart battled fear, the human's heart battled distrust. But side by side they moved, for even broken trust was stronger than facing the night alone. In the hidden halls of the palace, rebels whispered their victory was near. They believed division would tear the bond apart. But neither rebel nor noble could see that every test, every doubt, every question was shaping something new. Not chains, not law, but a bond that might grow into unbreakable trust. And as the warrior and the princess faced the dark corridors together, both knew the real test had only begun. The throne room was too quiet. Not the silence of peace, but the silence before a storm. The human warrior stepped inside with the princess at his side, his hand never leaving the hilt of his sword. Golden pillars glowed faintly, shadows crawling across the marble floor. Every noble stood in place, their eyes fixed on the princess, their faces calm but unreadable. It felt wrong. The warrior's instincts screamed danger, yet no blade had been drawn, no arrow loosed. The rebellion was not outside the palace anymore. It was here, standing in this hall, waiting, watching, hiding behind silken robes and jeweled crowns. The princess moved forward, her silver gown flowing behind her. She stood tall, though the weight of betrayal pressed on her shoulders. Her voice rang across the chamber, firm but filled with fire. You whisper in corners, you burn villages in the night, and you send blades at my heart, she said. If you have courage, then strike me here before my throne. The nobles shifted uneasily, some glancing at one another. The human's grip tightened on his sword, his eyes scanning every hand, every face. Then, at the far end of the chamber, a sound broke the silence. A slow clap, echoing against the golden walls. From the shadows stepped a figure cloaked in crimson, his smile sharp as the blade at his hip. The princess froze, her eyes widening. It was no stranger, it was a high-ranking noble, once her father's most trusted advisor. Courage, the man said softly, his voice dripping with venom. Do you call it courage when you bind yourself to a human? Do you call it loyalty when you break the old ways? Gasps rippled through the hall. The rebellion's true leader had revealed himself. The human stepped forward, placing himself between the princess and the traitor. But the noble only smiled, raising his hand. At once, the throne room erupted in chaos. Blades flashed, hidden rebels throwing off their cloaks, guards turning against guards. The princess's loyal protectors fought to defend her, but they were outnumbered. The warrior cut through the first wave, steel ringing against steel, his movements sharp despite his wounds. Every strike was for survival, every breath a fight against the tide. The princess stood beside him, her alien power glowing from her palms, bursts of light striking down those who came too close. The rebel leader watched with calm eyes. "You bleed for her, human," he said, his voice cutting through the chaos. "But do you not see? She is already lost, and you will die for nothing." The warrior spat blood from his lips, his voice steady. "Then I will die standing, not crawling like you." The battle raged, fire spreading from toppled torches, smoke rising into the air. The throne itself shook as blades clashed upon its steps. The princess fought with all her strength, but the enemy pressed harder. Every moment was a question: would the bond hold, or would death claim them both? At last, the rebel leader drew his crimson blade and stepped into the fight. He moved with deadly grace, his strike aimed at the princess's heart. The human blocked the blow, the clash of steel shaking his arm. The traitor sneered, "Do you truly think a mortal can protect royalty from destiny?" The warrior's chest heaved, his arms shaking, yet his eyes never wavered. "I am human," he said through clenched teeth, "and that is enough." With a roar, he pushed forward, forcing the traitor back step by step. Their blades rang like thunder, sparks flying in every direction. The princess cried out, her power lashing into the air, but the battle between the two men filled the throne room like a storm. The nobles watched, torn between fear and awe. Some whispered of the ancient bond, others prayed silently. And as the human fought, every strike carried not only steel but the weight of sacrifice. For he knew if he fell, the princess would fall with him. At the height of the clash, the traitor raised his blade high, his voice full of rage. "Then fall, human." But before the strike could land, the human twisted, his blade driving into the traitor's chest. Silence crashed over the hall as the crimson cloak fell. The rebellion's leader gasped once, then collapsed upon the steps of the throne. The warrior fell to one knee, blood dripping from his wounds. The princess rushed to him, her hands glowing with light as she tried to heal. The hall stood frozen, rebels disarmed, nobles trembling. The rebellion had been broken, but at a cost. The warrior lifted his eyes to the princess, his voice weak but unshaken. "It is done," he whispered. Her hands trembled, her eyes shining with both sorrow and relief. "No," she whispered back. "It is not done. It has only begun." The palace was quiet after the storm. Smoke curled from shattered torches. Broken weapons lay across the marble floor, and the golden banners were torn and blackened. The rebellion's leader was gone, his crimson cloak soaked in blood. But the silence that followed was not peace. It was the silence of change. The human warrior knelt at the foot of the throne, his body trembling with pain. Every wound screamed, yet he held himself upright. He had stood against blades, fire, and betrayal, and still he had not fallen. The princess was at his side, her hands glowing faintly as she poured what strength she had left into healing him. Around them, the nobles stood frozen, some in shame, some in awe, none daring to speak. For they had seen what tradition could not explain, a human, an outsider, standing where no one else dared. And in his defiance, they had seen something more powerful than bloodlines or crowns. They had seen the bond. The princess rose slowly, her gown torn, her face streaked with dust and tears. But her voice was steady as it echoed across the throne room. "This human is not my servant. He is not my shadow. He is my equal," she declared. "By the law of our people, by the life debt that cannot be broken, his fate is mine and mine is his, until the stars themselves fade." A ripple of shock moved through the court. Some bowed their heads in respect, others turned away in silence. But none spoke against her. The bond had been sealed not only by law, but by blood, sacrifice, and courage. And even the most bitter enemy could not deny what they had seen with their own eyes. The human tried to stand, his body weak, but the princess reached out, steadying him. "You should rest," she whispered. He shook his head, his voice rough. "I cannot rest while enemies remain." She looked at him, sadness and pride mingling in her eyes. "Then we will face them together," she said, "for that is the path we share now." Outside the palace walls, the empire stirred. The rebellion had been crushed, but whispers carried across the stars. Other kingdoms would hear of this night, of a princess bound to a human, of a warrior who stood where no one else dared. Some would see it as weakness, others as strength, but all would remember it. In the days that followed, the warrior's name was spoken in markets, in villages, in alien courts beyond the empire. Some called him a savior, others a curse. But no one could deny that his choice, a leap before a blade, had changed the course of history. Late one night, as the twin moons shone over the ruined palace, the princess stood beside him on the balcony. The stars stretched endless above them, silent witnesses to their fate. She turned to him, her voice soft. "Do you regret it? Throwing yourself before the blade?" The warrior looked at her, his scars lit by moonlight. "No," he said simply, "because in that moment, I chose, and I would choose the same again." For a long time they stood in silence, side by side. No crown, no law, no rebellion could break what they had become. Two lives bound together, not by chains, but by choice, by sacrifice, by something larger than either of them could name. Far below the balcony, the city stirred uneasily. The rebellion had been cut down, but shadows still lingered in alleys and councils. Enemies would come again, from within and from beyond the stars. But the bond had been tested by fire, and it had not broken. It had only grown stronger. The princess reached for his hand, her fingers trembling as they touched his. "Then let the stars come," she whispered, "for we will meet them together." And in that moment, under the silent sky, the legend of the human warrior and the alien princess was sealed forever. Not a story of chains, not a story of law, but a story of courage, sacrifice, and a bond that turned two lives into one fate. A story that would echo through empires. A story that whispered to the stars, "Bound forever."